Hey everybody, this is Gabriel Hernandez with Comical Opinions. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. First of all, this is my first two-video day. Put out a video a little bit earlier today talking about taking my own advice and stating outright who I think the target audience for this content would be or could be or should be. That opinion may change over time, but I think it's worth a listen just so you understand that that's the question, which is who is this for, is something that we should always be asking whenever we're creating something, anything, especially when it comes to content, and particularly when it comes to comic books. So why don't you go ahead and check out that video. Also, there is a corresponding newsletter article that kind of talks about that same concept in the context of comics editors. I think it's worth checking out. So go ahead and head over to the channel and take a look today. But today's video is going to be a little bit different. As the channel name suggests, Comical Opinions, I make every video about my opinion about a particular topic and see where it takes us, and hopefully it's something that's worthwhile to talk about and think about. Today, I'm not going to express mostly my opinion. Today, I'm going to express an opinion from somebody else. And in this case, it is the senior editor over at Valiant, and according to her Twitter bio, also Image Comics, is one Heather Antos. Now, if anybody follows the comic book industry, that name should be very familiar to you, but at present she is the senior editor for Valiant and Image, which makes a number of different comics titles. Valiant is known for comics like X-O Man of War, Ninjak, to name a few. Image makes a number of different titles, too many to name, but I think the early days of Image were famous for the trio of, or actually several, Mark Silvestri, Todd McFarlane, that's where he brought in Spawn, Robert Liefeld, Youngblood, all those different groups and characters and titles. That's where that comes from. And in more recent years, also Robert Kirkman's work as well. So she's senior editor over there. And what happened was I saw an interesting post that she was reacting to, where somebody had mentioned the notion of gatekeeping and how it's somehow now become necessary because of what they termed as fake fan invasion. Now, I'm not going to speak for that individual. I haven't talked to them. I haven't reached out to them. But essentially, I think the point they were getting at is the industry was fine, and I say that in air quotes, fine the way it was. And when you have individuals come in with ulterior motives, and I think that's what they were getting at, where the motive is to take what was working fine and just change it to suit alternate tastes, effectively it's ruined. It's ruined. And Heather, who was, I think, very, I was pleasantly surprised at how willing she was to engage me in the conversation. So that's great. That's very cool of her. Kind of responded to that by saying, I forgot the part of the creative process where creators fill out a form explicitly stating which specific fans their creations are for, and no one else ever under any circumstances. There's definitely some condescension, some snark in that. There's no denying that. But I think she does make a valid point that creators can't necessarily do everything by committee, especially not fan committee, because you can't please everyone. So there's a valid point in there. But here's where I come in. When I saw that, I was like, that's a little bit off. To be fair, understanding the customer base, likes, dislikes, what resonates, what doesn't, is part of the publishing process. It's not a stretch to say consideration for what appeals to the customers who regularly buy comics. That's the key, regularly buy comics. We're talking about sort of the legacy market, if you will, has not been a priority for a while. And then she brings up the sort of infamous ICV2 2019 comic sales graph, which, funny enough, she put it up from an article on Comics Beat, which was an article based on the ICV2. I don't know why she didn't go to the original, but oh well. But then I kind of come back with the quote where a majority of those gains for the comic industry are based on graphic novels targeted at kids, coming in through scholastic book fairs, coming in traditional bookstores. The monthly floppy market was fairly stagnant. And if you look at it from a perspective of available money, how much money did people have to spend in cash in 2019? 2019 in the United States was a record economic year on a number of different factors, mostly on the employment front. So you had more people were working, which means it had more people that with disposable cash, and yet the monthly floppy market, when we're talking about comics in this opinion, we're talking about the monthly floppy market was flat. That means more people had more money, but they were less willing to spend it on buying comics. And that's kind of the point I'm making there. But I think she sort of took it in a different way. He can read. Oh, great. That's more condescending snark. But, that seems to be the norm on Twitter these days. Comics aren't just for one audience, but rather growing in different audiences, thus gaining fans and readers early on and expanding beyond just stereotypical superheroes. Amazing stuff. She's saying it, you have to kind of get past the snark a little bit. But the fact of the matter is that some folks have been discussing for years, monthly issues don't make sense in a market that has grown accustomed to a binge entertainment model. Now, that's an interesting point. One that I think I might have heard before, but I hadn't really considered as a deep factor in this conversation. And that's why I'm sort of reading her quotes from her without too much commentary, I hope, or too much defensiveness. I'm just sort of taking it as it is. And the point she's making here is that it's the Netflix generation. People are used to getting all the shows and they just kind of want to binge it all at once. And so what does that mean from a monthly market perspective? If you read an issue, let's say I read an issue of Green Lantern, and starts well, ends well, you've got some good meat in the issue, it's good art, it's good writing, it's everything that you want in a comic, and then you have to wait a month to get the next one. Does that make sense for kind of the binge everything now kind of, and I'll term it this way, the Netflix generation that we've sort of morphed into? I can see that point being pretty strong in the opinion that she's expressing here, and I can see how that sort of works at odds or against the whole monthly notion of creating comics and then you just have to wait a month, and then create a comic and then you have to wait a month. I mean, the creators in the back end are constantly working, but it's from a consumption perspective. If I'm a consumer and I'm spending money, I have to wait a month. And does that really work anymore? Do people like that? And especially when they're used to the instant gratification. The other example I'll bring up is, and let me see if I can find it here. The Boys season 2 just is that Netflix or Amazon? I think it's Amazon. Boys season 2 review bombed. Oh, geez, I can't type. There we go. CBR. Well, okay, it's CBR. Season 2 of The Boys debuted on September 4th, but fans have not been impressed with its release schedule. So here we have a specific example where news sites are reporting, CBR, air quotes news, are reporting that they're not getting all the the entire season of The Boys all at once. And just for that reason alone, the fans are getting angry. The fans are getting mad. How much truth is there in that? I don't know, because I didn't read this whole article, but I do remember glossing over it. So that somewhat reinforces Heather's point here about sort of we've turned into a binge entertainment industry, and then monthly markets where the issue is just spaced out, especially if you're talking 22, 24, 30 pages. It works as well anymore, or it becomes dissatisfying. Now, forget about teaching customers to pre-order every single issue in series. It's just not practical. The shops and publishers that have adapted and are flexible are doing well. It's basic business. Okay, I agree with that. And that seems to be a common rallying cry for comic book shops, where people don't pre-order, or they order and put stuff in pull boxes and don't pay for them. And then comic owners are just saying, comic shop owners are just saying, can you please come pick up your books? Can you please pay for your books? The problem currently we see is the people who think they are the target audience no longer are, but that certainly doesn't mean they still don't get plenty of product hearted, specifically geared toward them. More pie for someone else doesn't mean less pie for you. Now, I do agree with this last line. It's not a zero-sum game. There's always room to create more content. That's 100%, I think, spot on. I think this first statement here is where our opinions sort of don't line up. Problem currently we're seeing is that people who think they're the target audience no longer are. That's true from the perspective, if you look at it from the publisher's perspective, as in they are no longer chasing that legacy audience. They're focusing on graphic novels for young adults and for kids. They're focusing on creating trades that are more sold in bookstores. So it's the legacy audience is still a core audience. Where I think we disagree, and where my opinion comes in, is I think the publishers have decided to not focus their energies on that core audience instead of taking that core audience, build on them, maintain them, continue to make them happy, and then add new audiences to it. They've essentially taken their focus off one audience and shifted it over to the other. I think it's sort of a chicken and egg disagreement, where she's seeing it from the publisher perspective, saying the core audience, the legacy audience, is no longer viable. We have to move over here. What I'm saying is the core audience is still a valuable audience. The reason they're not growing is because you've neglected them. I think there's a little bit of room for right and wrong in both of those scenarios. And I say as much here. Of course, it's not a zero-sum game, but the existing audience that it's largely funded the monthly market has been getting unappealing content. I'll stand by that one. Higher prices, lower quality, and the legacy customers are walking away. I agree we're suffering bad business models in more ways than one. And here she's sort of maybe taking a little bit of umbrage at lower quality and sort of making the assumption that that lower quality means are two different things, which is true. Much of the audience walking away is complaining about content being not directly catered to their very outdated scope. That doesn't make it lower quality. Okay, here we're making the distinction, and in the following quote, she's saying this much as well. We're making the distinction between, is the content bad? In other words, is the publisher putting out a bad comic book, and making a comic book that's not for me? And then she goes on for several more tweets here. I'm not going to go into all of them just because that would take a really long time. But I make the point here of not making, there's no confusion between low quality and not for me. And I give a few examples. Pink Lemonade, not for me. Tinian's Decorum, if you're into postmodern art really hardcore, you're going to like it. If you're not into postmodern art, it's a tough read. I'm going to be honest with you, it's a tough read. Marvel Snapshots, man, that was rough to get through. Iron Man 2020, I think, has been fairly critically lambasted. I think that's fair to say. Dear Becky, that first issue was tough. That first issue of Dear Becky was really tough. I mean, there's literally no story in that first issue. And New Warriors, that, as I point out, it got banished to Amazon. They're not even releasing that in the comic book stores. You're just going to get it as a trade on Amazon, I think, in October, November. So I think there's a plethora of examples here where, even though we might still be getting a lot of content, the quality of the content is very much in question. So my opinion is you can't make the argument that you're still getting plenty of content when a significant portion of that content is just bad. That's that doesn't work that way. But let's go back a little bit to kind of build on her concept about the Netflix mentality of making content binge worthy. I'd be willing to argue that the binge model has subconsciously affected those as well, not to mention Hollywood's capability to match comic book action. True, if you go look at the CW and the Arrowverse and everything else. Before that, what seemed the books was unfathomable on screen, but now it's everywhere. I think the point she's making here is that the quality of the comic book has to come up to Hollywood levels. To a certain degree, I agree with that. But is that a problem because Hollywood just has millions of dollars to spend to make things photorealistic and fantastic and eye-poppingly good? Or has the quality of the art in the comic books not risen to that occasion? Or is there something in the middle? I think there's something in the middle. And to a certain degree, the quality of the art is just maybe not what it used to be. That can be an argument that can be made, I think, either way. The suspension of disbelief is so much more difficult than ever, and our abilities as humans to simply be patient and wait until an arc is finished before complaining about it is not answering all our questions in the first panel. It just doesn't exist. Again, also I can see that argument as well. The point there being about decompressing storylines, stretching out a storyline over multiple issues, and when you have to wait a month in between each issue can be difficult. That can be hard to maintain, to hold somebody's focus, to maintain somebody's attention, especially, again, if we're talking about the Netflix generation and folks are just used to getting the whole story all at once and they want to binge through it. Obviously, yes, for that type of individual that can't be patient, that can't maintain their focus for stretched over months and months and months, that decompressed style of storytelling, it's better for them just to wait for the trade paperback. What are you going to say about that? Although I do believe Comics by Perch made an argument earlier in a recent video about the difference between Western comics and manga is stretched out over sometimes many issues and many months, and in some cases years. But the way they deal with that is how they segregate the content. Genji versus Genji. Yeah, sometimes the names are rough on me. Versus Shonen versus Seinen, etc. There's a very clear demographic structure to manga as far as the numbering system, the age demographics they target, the gender demographics they target, the genre demographics they target, horror versus romance versus small children type content. Their targeting is very focused and very structured, much different than Western comics. And so, yeah, she's making a case here that I think I can get behind, although that's partly due to the structure of how the publishers are delivering the content. I think there's a case to be made there as well, that it doesn't all go one way. It's not all the responsibility on one party. Tangents aside, the monthly model has been dying, and rightfully so. And there's the quote that'll be the title of the video. For a very long time, just like the radio drama was replaced by the TV, one day OGNs will fully replace the monthly issue. And I don't know how I feel about that. I can see the market heading in that direction. Let's take a title. Let's say The Flash. Okay, let's say The Flash moves completely away from monthly titles, and they just go to something like a graphic novel that's released quarterly. Is that better for the market? Does that make more sense for the market? Maybe. Let's take a more likely example, possibly the likely example. Let's take Batman as an example. And if you move to a quarterly graphic novel, does that make more sense for the publishing industry and for how people want to consume content? You buy your Batman book once a quarter and you get the whole arc. You get everything and all the issues. What would have been broken up into monthly issues is you get it all at once. And then if you want to do some ancillary titles, like maybe you want to do a Detective Comics one shot where he faces off against Clayface. I'm making something up. And then you, instead of doing a monthly title for that, that could be a specialized monthly title, or maybe those are relegated to being released only on digital, where you can get them out a lot faster and get them more instantaneously. From a somebody who's been a lifelong comics reader, I would be sad to see the monthly comics go, but I think I could understand why they would need to go because of just the logistics and the practicality of it all. That makes. I think there's a certain sense and a logic to that from a business point of view. Yeah. But she's also making a secondary point here. Was it because the radio drama was lower quality? Nope. The TV show was just newer, fresher, more accessible, exciting, and different. Yeah, I sort of agree with that, but at the same time, it's a different medium. I mean, radio just gives you something that, or I should say, TV gave you something that radio couldn't. But in this case, you're still getting a comic. It's still a visual medium on print. Print could be digital as well as physical paper. But the medium really didn't change. It's the delivery that changed. So I think she's making an apples to oranges comparison here that I'm not 100% sold on. So we'll have to think about that one a little bit. There will always be something new, fresher, more accessible, exciting, and different for the consumer. For publishers to continue to push the same monthly content and not adapt or shift at all is quite literally the definition of insanity. Okay, yes, if the market has to grow, but there's where we don't see eye to eye on that is the market. What she's saying here, from her perspective as a positive, is push the same monthly content. From my perspective, pushing the same monthly content when a significant portion of that content is not good is where I think the market is not growing, and it needs to improve. Publishers and shops that adapt are the ones that will thrive, which that 2019 graph so perfectly displays. Well, yeah, and that's pretty great that comics are and continue to be as important as ever in our medium. I, for one, can't wait to see how they continue to grow. Good, and that's where I bring in that quote about delineating between good content versus content that's not for me. And she has some snarker and that goes into it. And I think it went back, it got a little bit better. Let me go back to where she split off a little bit. Yes. So I think there's a lot of good points in there, and eventually there's some continuation of the thread. I kind of lost it a little bit where basically we agreed that we don't see eye to eye, sort of shook hands and said, thank you, I appreciate being civil and constructive. Go see my other video about who is the channel for. That's always key. No matter no matter how far you disagree, civil and constructive is the way. But I thought this was very interesting to get a lot of insight and a lot of opinions from a senior editor over at Valiant and also Image, if I remember correctly from her bio. But let me know what you think. Do you agree with Heather on these points? Or do you think there's sort of a chicken and egg scenario where she's arguing from one point of view, but the customer sees it from the opposite point of view, and needs to be a sort of meeting of the minds to figure out where's the right middle spot? So that's the opinion for today, which is actually Heather's opinion for today. I do appreciate her taking the time to engage me in this exchange. Again, yes, we kept it civil, and I think that was just as important as much as the content that I got out of it. But let me know what you think about this perspective from a senior editor of Valiant. Do you agree with her? Do you disagree with her? Let me know. Like, share, comment, subscribe down below in the video. And don't forget, if you go over to my newsletter, Comical Opinions, you can subscribe. It's absolutely free. You'll be immediately notified as soon as I put out my weekly newsletter. And also, if you go over there and you dig into the archive, you can see that I have a newsletter article from the 30th talking exactly about comics editors and the question of who is this for, which I think is part of the issue where Miss Antos and I kind of disagree. Is I think a lot of the comics that are being produced, they really don't know who they're making them for, and that's why they keep missing the mark. And when you don't know who you're making comics for, nobody buys them. And nobody buys them, the market shrinks. I think there's a kind of a simple linear line there that's left out of her stance on this. But that's okay, because she makes a lot of great points as well. I think they all need to be taken into account and addressed to a certain degree. So that's it. Again, go over to Comical Opinions, sign up. It's completely free, and subscribers will get some interesting perks that I'm working on for the near future, but you can only get them if you subscribe. Again, it's completely free. That's it for Comical Opinions today. I'm Gabe Hernandez. Thank you for your time. I do appreciate you showing up, and have a great day.